America is home to 33 million small businesses, the beating heart of communities across the country.
And proof that the American dream is still alive.
This is a show about those dreamers and doers and the communities they serve.
Their real life stories.
Their struggles and successes.
Their grit, determination, and passion.
And the people who fight
to keep their American dream alive.
I'm Alfredo Ortiz.
I'm Elaine Parker.
And it's time for another episode of Main Street Matters,
America's small business megaphone. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. I'm Elaine Parker, the president of the Job Creators Network Foundation.
And I'm Jamie Bowers. I'm filling in for Alfredo Ortiz, and I'm a producer here on the show.
Thanks for joining me today, Jamie, and being my Ed McMahon again. Always have a lot of fun with you.
Always happy to fill in.
And please subscribe to the show at salempodcastnetwork.com or wherever you get your podcasts from. Jamie, today we are joined by Misty Chally. She's the executive director of the Critical Labor Coalition. The CLC was formed to find solutions to the nation's critical labor shortage and unleash the potential of the U.S. workforce, comprised of trade associations, nonprofit organizations, corporate and individual businesses. CLC supports legislative efforts to remove the barriers currently keeping many people from considering employment opportunities.
Well, I'm excited to talk to Misty as well, because I think these are huge issues right now. The labor shortages and the resurgence, I think, of the labor movement. You know, we've seen the UPS strikes, we've seen the UAW strikes. I think there is the Biden administration has certainly helped labor unions and been an advocate for labor unions that has not happened before. And I think there are a lot of businesses that are in situations where they're being confronted with strikes, or they're being confronted with unions who have demands that just don't fit what the economics are today. And so I think Misty's really working on an issue that a lot of small businesses are dealing with. How do you get good people? And then how do you compete in this world where the labor unions and others are saying, hey, we want higher pay, we want higher benefits, and sometimes to the point where it just is impossible. So it should be interesting.
Yeah, there's, I'm not sure if she's working directly on it. We should ask her about it, but I know that there is an effort to also, and it may have already gone through, to take away non-competes, so that companies cannot enforce non-competes, which, it's a double-edged sword. But if you're a company that, it's relationship-oriented, you're selling, or and you've got people going from your company to your direct competitors and taking your customers, those customers with them. I mean, that's the reason, is to protect your business, and that could be devastating. So there's got to be some middle ground to find there as far as non-competes, but to take them away and leave business, that's kind of like taking away, a trademark, the ability to trademark your logos or something that you invent. It doesn't seem like it's fair.
Sure. I always think it's interesting too with some of these pushes. I just saw a town has they passed a $25 minimum wage, and clearly California is getting closer to $20. And there's this there's kind of this weird cycle where you have in this case, you have like the administration and Democrats in Congress passing all of these funding bills that increase inflation, which then affects the cost of living for everyone. And then they turn around and say, corporations are awful and mean, and small businesses are mean because they won't pay enough because people can't live on the money they're making. But the reason they can't make the money there to live is because the prices have all gone too high. So then they come around and say, well, we need to raise the minimum wage, or we need to, add this mandate in place, which then causes more inflation. I mean, it's this kind of vicious cycle, and there's not really a recognition that they're causing the problem. Part of the reason people are calling for higher wages is that gas is expensive, food is expensive. It just is really out of control. But these same policies that they're saying we need to help the situation are actually creating that inflation and actually increasing the cost of living. So I know I'm simplifying a very complex system, but I just think it's ironic that these things are just kind of going round and round, and they act like they're not to blame at all for the situation we're in.
No, I mean, I think that's a great point. And the end of the UAW strike is probably a great example when you look at, the cost of wage increases that the union was able to win from the big three automakers. It's great for the workers, but at the end of the paragraph of that story, the cost of every single vehicle is going to go up another $600. So how far ahead are they really going to get? Because as those prices go up, other companies that are buying those vehicles have to raise their prices, and it's a domino effect of what happens, and then we're right back to where we were, and the UAW workers say, gosh, I don't have enough to live, we need to go on strike again.
Yeah. I think, a lot of people, especially in the restaurant industry, would tell you that they're paying these higher wages when they need to fill jobs because they're competing with other people. And I think that's the way, I mean, in general, wages follow skills. There's a reason a neurosurgeon makes more money than somebody who is in front of the fry machine at a fast food restaurant. And so I think as you build your skills, that's the way you make more money. Or if you are in high demand in an industry or an area that needs more workers, uh, but if you do it through mandates, then you really are causing this kind of inflationary effect that's going to affect everybody and how the cost of living is.
Yeah, it's a tremendous distortion in the marketplace when you're mandating $25 an hour minimum wages, or $20 an hour minimum wages. I mean, why not 30? Why not 35? Why not 50? Why not $100 an hour?
Yeah,
To work in front of the fryer at McDonald's. I know there was a report last week, I think I saw or read about that the average cost of taking your family out to McDonald's now is around $40, $45.
yeah,
When that used to be sort of the cheap eats for my family when my kids were little, and we just were running too much, from one after school activity to the next. It was run through the drive-through and grab a Happy Meal. And that doesn't sound like an affordable option anymore for families.
yeah. I think we're grappling with that across the board. Road trips are more expensive because of gasoline. Cars, as you mentioned, um, our family was looking at a car recently, and it really is amazing. An entry level new car is you're close to 30,000 for a low end new car. Um, and so it just across the board has really gone up over the last, you know obviously a ton in the last 2 years, 3 years. Um, and I think that is affecting the standard of living overall.
Yeah, and when you think about it, all of this, I think you could tie back to that first day with the Biden administration and the cost of energy. I mean, energy drives everything. And I'll just spend a quick minute on this because I know that Misty's joining us soon. But the new domestic energy policy that will help small businesses and increase domestic energy production, that the Congress is looking at. It will help reduce inflation and cut wasteful spending. This bill is an all of the above energy policy. The Biden administration is just being so aggressive with their EV push, that it's making it unaffordable for everyday ordinary Americans to buy cars, to put gas in their cars, to buy food. It increases the cost of every single thing we do, because the food has to be trucked in, the cost of the energy to get it trucked in, the products that we buy gets brought in. All of that is all goes back to energy policy. And unless this administration stops driving up the cost of energy, we are going to continue seeing inflation, and Americans are going to continue falling behind.
It's interesting. We talked about the labor aspects and the strikes by the UAW against the big three. And one of the big sticking points, I mean, clearly people are talking about the wages as one of the concerns of the UAW. The other concern is the push for the big three automakers to have more EV vehicles because they use fewer parts. They're easier to put together. You need fewer people. And then on the maintenance side, those dealerships and those car repair places, there are fewer parts to break. So maybe from a consumer standpoint, there's an advantage there. And if consumers really want them, that's great. But here you have the administration siding clearly with UAW in these strikes, but at the same time pushing mandates that are directly against what they want in terms of EV vehicles. I mean, the UAW is claiming that the big three are pushing for EV vehicles, but I don't know that the big three, other than their marketing campaigns, are really interested in pushing EV vehicles, other than the fact that they know they're being mandated to. So here you have the Biden administration on one hand saying, we support the UAW, but then pushing a policy that goes completely counter to what the UAW wants. So it's kind of interesting. I think the EV question is really up in the air when it comes to figuring out how it's going to affect the labor pool, figuring out how it affects the unions and the production of cars here in the U.S.
Yeah, well, I am glad to see this bill come forward. Time will tell how far it actually gets. But this bill advances, obviously, the provisions in the Job Creators Network, American Small Business Prosperity Plan, that calls on Congress to enact legislation that would unleash domestic energy and lower wasteful government spending. So I'm glad to see that, that plan. Our listeners can go to jobcreatorsnetwork.com and take a look at the American Small Business Prosperity Plan, because it is a very simple 8-point plan that will help bring back this economy and prioritize small business and the 30 million small businesses, 30 million people who work for them. And, as we know, small business drives this economy. And so if we can help small business with reducing the cost of energy, we help everybody.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, now it's time for our interview with Misty Chally, and she is the executive director of the Critical Labor Coalition. Misty also represents the Wendy's Company, the National Franchisee Association, Franchise Business Services, and the Coalition of Franchisee Associations in Washington, D.C. In this role, she advocates on issues ranging from tax to healthcare to labor. She serves on the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's Labor and Small Business Committees, as well as a number of coalitions and task forces. Misty, welcome to Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, I am so excited to learn about your organization, the Critical Labor Coalition. Tell us a little bit about the organization and what the mission and the goals are.
Yeah, so I formed the Critical Labor Coalition about a year and a half ago. And it came out of a conversation I was having with the Coalition of Franchisee Associations, CFA, and I know CFA has a long history partnership with Job Creators Network. And we were talking about, what are the top issues legislatively on a federal level. And, what came out of that was, regardless of industry, whether it was the Planet Fitness franchisees or Meineke or Burger King, everybody was having problems with the labor shortage. And that's really where the idea came. And so we started talking about, well, what kind of legislative solutions can we address? And from that conversation came, well, let's start looking at specific demographics. And we started looking at the senior community. And how do we get the senior community back to work? It was just past COVID, and a lot of people had retired early or not, and they're very reliable workforce, very smart, hardworking, reliable, and everybody said we'd love to get them back into the workforce. So I just did a little digging and reached out to AARP, learned about some legislation that they were working on to expand the earned income tax credit for those over 65. And that's really how it started. I started kind of like looking around DC, talking to some of my colleagues at the National Restaurant Association and Hotel and Lodging. And it just kind of started from there, and it really has grown ever since then.
That is really interesting. What have you seen as the barriers? If you're talking about the earned income tax credit, do a little bit and explain to people what the earned income tax credit is, because that is not something that is in I think, the public vernacular. And so that would be interesting. And then how does that attract older people? I'm kind of curious where those barriers are for older people to go into the workforce.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the Earned Income Tax Credit, or EITC here in DC, is a tax credit for workers in, some lower income workers, workers that need assistance a little bit kind of to offset the payroll taxes and all of that kind of stuff that you get when you're working. And prior to the pandemic, those under 25 and over 65 who did not have a qualifying child, who weren't raising a child, were not eligible for the tax credit. During COVID, because of, a lot of legislation was passed for increased funding, EITC was expanded so that if you were over 65 or under 25, that you could get EITC after that, and for a larger amount. There was expanded in a number of different ways, but that expired. That was a temporary fix, and so now we're working with AARP to permanently eliminate that top tier. And we're working with other organizations like Golden State Opportunity and other anti-poverty organizations that we wouldn't necessarily partner with on other issues, to lower that bottom age limit to 18. So, if you don't have a qualifying child, you should be able to receive the tax credit if you're working. And that's really how it started.
So the earned income tax credit will boost income for those people who qualify. So they're basically lower income workers, people who would be working at either restaurants or retail shops where maybe that isn't it's an hourly wage that's on the lower end. Now, just to clarify, do employers then get some benefit as well as the worker, or does all the benefit flow to the worker, or some of those payroll taxes credited to the employer as well?
Right. That is, the EITC is specifically targeted at the workers. So they get the tax credit. There are other proposals that we support, like the Work Opportunity Tax Credit. That's another one. Or WOTC, that is a tax credit for employers to hire certain demographics that often overlap with those qualifying for EITC.
Gotcha. So yeah. I have a quick story. There were years ago, I was at an outlet mall, and there was a Black & Decker outlet, and there was an older gentleman behind the counter who was chatting it up with the, customers. He was very entertaining. He clearly was enjoying his job. And somebody said, "Well, I thought you retired." And he said, "Yeah, about it was probably 9 months ago I retired. And after 6 months of being at home, my wife said to me, 'Harold, I married you for better or for worse, but I did not marry you for lunch. Go get a job.'" And so he had gotten a job at the Black & Decker store and was working part-time, but it clearly helping the store, but also he was really enjoying, the engagement and dealing with customers and everything else. I always remembered that story. I thought it was funny.
Well, the older community is they're great employees and very reliable. And often, they don't need to work full time. They can, sometimes they want to just get back into the community and work part time. And they're just fantastic employees. So we want to do what we can to get them back in. And a lot of them, frankly, retired early. They were concerned about COVID. The job market was not doing well. And so some of them regretted that choice after post COVID and wanted to re-enter. So,
Sure.
We'll do what we can to help that.
That sounds great.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I'm not sure where you are. Are you in DC?
I'm outside of DC. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm in Florida, and Publix is the big grocery store here. And I've noticed for years, even pre-COVID, that Publix has tapped into older employees and bringing them into the workforce to work in the stores. Reliability obviously is one, but obviously we've seen this sort of drift from younger people, not wanting to do certain jobs. And so they tapped into it. And I remember having a conversation with one of the older employees who said, I work here, I've got to put in 80 hours a month. So 20 hours a week. He's like, it gets me out of the house. I'm not bugging my wife. And I get good exercise and I get to talk to everybody all day, and I get insurance benefits to coincide with his Medicare, and that was a big help for him. And plus he made a little bit of money.
Yeah.
We, so one of our members, or two of our members, are the National Grocers Association and the Food Marketing Institute.
Sure.
I just spoke at their the NGA's annual meeting on a panel about, what does the workforce look like? And, just as you're saying, Elaine, the workforce is changing. And while some industries are back 100%, a lot of those that our coalition, the Critical Labor Coalition represents, are in the service industry. And as you mentioned, the demographics are changing. People want more flexibility. People want not to be physically in a retail or restaurant space. They want to work from home, and that just isn't the reality for restaurant owners and retailers and hoteliers. They need people physically there. And so that's really what we're trying to do, get people back into the workforce and physically into, the businesses.
Absolutely. What are some of the other issues that you're tackling on the labor shortage, whether it might be, in this case, you're looking to expand legislation that will help bring older or younger Americans into the workforce. But what about legislation that is or policy that currently exists that's making it harder for employers to find jobs? Or is there anything that you're trying to repeal or fight that you see as a big challenge for these kind of entry-level jobs or these retail jobs or restaurant jobs?
Yeah. Yes, thank you for that question. One of the things that we're trying to kind of push back, or not push back on, but the effects of the legislation have really affected the labor force, are the tightened immigration policies that occurred during COVID. For whatever reason, agree or disagree, those policies kind of limited the amount of people that could come in and legally work. And we're seeing the effects of all of that now. It's just a mess, as I'm sure you all know. You see it on the news and everything. And so in addition to tax policy, the other area we're really focusing on is workforce. There aren't enough people here. Again, going back to what you were saying, Elaine, the changing demographics, younger workers aren't entering the workforce as they did in the past. I don't know about you guys, but when I was 16, I wanted to work. My daughter just wants to play soccer, and honestly, it's just changed the demographics, and so we need workers here. We just don't have enough. And the recent jobs report issued by the Department of Labor came out and said, okay, well, for every job opening, there's 0.7 unemployed workers looking for a job. So that means that if everybody that was filed for unemployment found a job, there would still be, and I don't have the exact number, but hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of job openings, and that's the problem. So we do want to focus or expand on things like the time period in which asylum seekers, when they come over, right now it's a minimum of 180 days to get a work permit. So they're they're getting government funding. Some of them are in the hotels that need the workers, ironically, and they want to work. They want to be part of the community, and they're just not able to. So we support. There are a couple pieces of bipartisan legislation in both houses that would reduce that time frame to 30 days. Let them work. We need it, and they want it. And then there's another workforce bill we're working with Congressman Smucker and Cuellar on, which would create a non-immigrant visa program, an H-2C visa, for those that don't have specialized skills. You don't need a college education to come over. It's not an ag visa. These are for service workers, because you probably go into restaurants just like I do, and there's a wait, but there are 20 tables open, and you're wondering why there's a wait, and it's because there's no servers. There's not enough servers. So that's another area that we're looking at.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and I think both sides have of the political aisle have made immigration a very emotional issue, and they have both used it to further their own gains. But the reality is, you need more workers in the system, and these are not jobs that are being taken away. And I used air quotes there, from people who are American citizens looking for those jobs. There is nobody who is doing many of those jobs. And I think the reality is, what happens is you get employers who are skirting the law, hiring people under the table. And so that is not only disadvantaging the employers that play by the rules, but it's disadvantaging those workers too, because they're getting paid less, they're not getting benefits, and more importantly, they're not paying taxes. And so if there's a way to legally do this, and you can debate whether those people deserve citizenship all day long. I have no problem with that. But I do think there are people who want to work, and there are jobs that are open. And it seems crazy that we can't come up with a way to marry those two things in a way that makes sense for the employers as well as the workers, but doesn't necessarily mean that you have, I think people like to create problems as they say, well, geez, these are all people who are getting welfare, or they're getting all these government benefits that they don't think they deserve. But I think many of the people who are there trying to come into this country really just want to work.
Yeah. And there are, in these bills, there are protections just, for those concerns, that address those concerns. In the Smucker bill, which is called the Essential Workers for Economic Advancement Act. It's a very long name. But there are protections in there, like the area has to be under a certain unemployment rate. So they're, not high unemployment. The employer, I believe the job has to have been posted for 60 or 90 days without, being filled, things like that.
Sure.
that help assuage those fears that these are jobs that are being taken away, because they're not. And those that continue to object for those reasons, they're just unfounded.
Yeah. I've had some conversations with people in the agricultural world, and whether it's chicken processing plants, for example. You are not getting a lot of American citizens applying for those jobs. And they said, without some sort of immigrant visa, work visa situations, they literally can't operate, because they would have no one working there. And so there are jobs out there, and that clearly most Americans don't want to do. And if you have immigrants who say, hey, I'm willing to do this job because I want to build a base, I'm trying to climb the economic ladder, it seems like we should be able to make that work.
Yeah, and it's also taxing on those employees that are currently working. I mean, they're working extra hours. They're being asked to do a lot more than they were in the past, and that's putting a toll on them. Especially, I was talking to a Burger King franchisee in a resort town, and they have. Some of them are closing 1 or 2 days a week just to give their employees a break. I mean, it's costing them money, but if they don't, then they're going to lose those employees. And with rising wages and all of that, there's so much more competition for those that are already in the workforce that it's the turnover is very high.
I once stopped at a Friendly's in the last couple of years, and the sign on the door says we're closed Monday through Wednesday because they couldn't staff it. And I was taking a picture of the sign because I thought it was such an unusual situation. And the owner happened to be inside, and he came out and he talked to me and he said, "Yeah, I can't find enough workers. Normally at this time of year, I should have 50 people on the payroll." He said, "I have 18. And there are just days I can't do it." And if he and his wife, who are the franchisee owners, aren't working, they have to close. He said he went to his daughter's college graduation, so they had to close the whole restaurant for a week because they couldn't operate without the owners actually working behind the counter or scooping ice cream or at the grill. I mean, it was really unbelievable.
Yeah, we do on our social media. Every Wednesday we post it's called Workers Wanted Wednesdays, and they're just help wanted signs. And tag the businesses that are there, just to show that this is an ongoing problem. This isn't going away. So.
Yeah, interesting. You're doing very important work in coming up with solutions. If we could just reduce the chaos at the border, you've got solutions for the people that are here, and that would help the business owners and as well as the people that are here in getting them back to work and helping them be contributing to society. Again, the argument on immigration status, whether they become citizens or not, is a different discussion, but the reality of what has to be dealt with is here. But I think first there has to be some reckoning of the chaos that's happening at the border, because you've got real solutions sort of down the pike if that chaos can be alleviated too. So thank you for what you're doing there. How are you working with and collaborating with other labor and advocacy groups to advance your agenda?
Well, many of the advocacy groups are members of ours, but what we pride ourselves on as well is, in addition to supporting bipartisan legislation, is working with what we call kind of strange bedfellows, groups that we wouldn't necessarily work with. I mean, when would we normally have the truck stop operators working with ARP? It's just, a different group. And it's really, the intent is to show Congress that these are problems. These are not partisan problems. These are issues on the right and the left. For example, on the immigration issue, we are working with groups like Tent and the Refugees International and hold on, I'm sorry, I forgot the name of it. It's called ASAP, the Asylum Seekers Advocacy Project. Groups like that, which we wouldn't normally be walking hand in hand with, we all want this asylum seeker bill to pass. And we might not agree on some of the details, but the ultimate goal is we just need more workers. We want more workers. Their agenda might be different, but we all want this bill to pass. So it's very interesting. And we were talking with Congressman Kevin Hern, who is a former McDonald's franchisee, about this. And he was saying, well, have you talked to the unions? And I said, well, it's interesting because we don't usually have that relationship with unions on a lot of issues, being perfectly candid, but we all want more workers here. So why are we not working, with them to get people here? And so in one of the coalitions, the unions, and I don't know which specific one because we don't organize that coalition, but we're a member of it, as are certain unions that are trying to get asylum seekers to work.
Interesting. Do you have a website where, are you trying to get grassroots people to write their congressman, write their senator about some of this legislation? Is there a place people who are listening who say, yeah, I agree, we need some common sense solutions here? Where can they go to voice their support for these things?
Yeah, our website is www.criticalaborcoalition.org. We are a nonprofit 501c4. And so you can go there, and you can also Google Critical Labor Coalition. Our social media is very active, and there is follow-up information there. And we also focus on second chance workers. That's not currently legislative, but to get those justice involved in individuals back to work, also very important. So here's another partnership. We're partnering with the American Probation and Parole Association, because right now there is no connection between an employer and their local probation officer. Like, you can't.
Interesting.
Yeah, they can't, there are ways to find them, obviously, but what we're trying to do is to connect those communities so that, there's a ongoing relationship between the employer and the probation officer, because they both want these people to get back to work, and the probation officer knows their clientele, and that whether they're ready mentally or otherwise to start working and really get them back into the community. And these are jobs where you don't need a college degree to advance and become a manager and become a regional manager and even own your own franchise. These are opportunities that second chance workers can take advantage of right now and really see a full-time career. So we're working non-legislatively on that proposal with APPA and some others.
There's no, you can't miss that we have a huge crime problem. And if you've got people coming out of the system, and the best way to keep them from committing crimes is to ensure that they acclimate back into society. And that begins with getting a job and contributing that way and being able to support themselves so that they don't feel the need to turn back to that life.
Exactly. Getting a job is one of the best ways to avoid recidivism in the second chance community, and so we're really kind of starting from scratch there. But I'm really excited about what we're doing there. So stay tuned.
Interesting. Now, Misty, clearly you've been working with the kind of small business community for a long time, whether it's with the franchisees, whether your current position. What has drawn you to that community, and do you have any personal experience? You're kind of a small business owner now. I mean, you're certainly entrepreneurial in that you started this coalition. You saw a need, you're filling the need. But what has drawn you to this community and these people?
Interesting question. Yes, I did start my own small business. Capital Solutions is my company, and the Critical Labor Coalition that I started is kind of a client of that company. But I didn't realize how hard it is to run your own business. I've never done it before. And it gives me a newfound respect for the franchisees I've been representing for 15 plus years. Man, it is hard. And you are on the line. Like, what you do is directly affects your standard of living. So
you're putting food on the table. This is not indirect. Yeah.
And all the filings, and I'm an attorney, but I don't know these filings and what we have. So, shout out to all the small business owners, man. This is tough, but the reason I love and continue to love representing franchisees like the Burger King franchisees, Buffalo Wild Wings, and the Coalition of Franchisee Associations is probably one of the most rewarding is helping to explain the franchise model. I mean, people on Capitol Hill, let alone people, all over, don't understand that, you see a Burger King on the door, and it's not a big corporate entity. It's a small business owner that lives there. that employs people in the neighborhood, and that sponsors Little League and things like that. And helping to explain that to members and their staff, the fact that they think that, they have deep pockets and unlimited funds to pay for everything, and people, their starting salary should be $50 an hour or what have you. For quick service in particular, I mean, that's just not the reality. And to be perfectly honest, I started from the other side, thinking that, yeah, you should be paying them $50 an hour. Why aren't you? And it wasn't until I really got to know the finances of, for example, there's a small business owner in Maine that was going to testify in the Senate on minimum wage. And she said, here are my numbers. Here's the top line. Here's what I have to give Burger King corporate. Here are my labor expenses. If you raise wages or impose other mandates on my business, number one, I am paying that. The corporation is not paying that. And number two, you will see I cannot live on that. It is just not enough for me to live on. So what do I have to do? I have to lay off workers, and kind of the effect is just the opposite of the intent. So I'm sorry for that long-winded answer, but you can see I'm very passionate about that, understanding that franchise model.
It's interesting. Elaine and I did some focus groups with quick service employees. And one of the questions, because you mentioned Congress doesn't understand it, the general public doesn't understand it, but a lot of times even the employees don't understand it. And we asked a question. We said, well, if you sell a $10 meal at your fast or your quick service restaurant, how much do you think the franchise owner keeps? And the numbers ranged from $5 to $7. They thought their profit margins were like 50 to 70. We even had somebody who said, well, I think they probably keep $9 out of the $10. And so when you said to them, hey, it's really, between 3 and 5%. So on a $10 meal, the owner of the franchise is making 30 cents, 50 cents, maybe. They were really blown away. And so one of the things Bernie Marcus, who founded the Job Creators Network, was very passionate about was he also was one of the co-founders of the Home Depot, but he wanted the employees at the Home Depot to know how the system worked and how the finances of the company worked. And if you did things like higher minimum wages or higher starting wages, well, something's got to give. Here's what the numbers are. So right. I think oftentimes people hear, like you, if you didn't know anything about it, you say, well, why can't these guys pay a living wage or a higher wage? And if you don't know how the business works, it seems like a reasonable ask, but it really, it's far more complicated than that.
Absolutely. And I'm still trying to explain it to my family who, I mean, a $20, for example, minimum wage sounds great. I mean, I'm sure every employer would love to do that. They have relationships with these employees. These are not, but the reality is that's not how quick service or, low profit margin businesses work. So there are other opportunities available there, but it's not. It's not, as you said, it's not as easy as it's saying just increase their wages.
Yeah, I once went my first in Washington. This had to be 25 years ago. I went to a minimum wage hearing on the Hill, and the chairman of the committee kind of went on a little speech. I won't share which political party he was with, but if you hear his comment, you probably can make some assumptions. But he said to one of the witnesses, who was a person who owned a small factory, who had 100 employees, and he says, well, I don't understand why, if you have 100 employees that you're paying the minimum wage to, why you can't just have 50 employees and pay them all a living wage. And I mean, to me, I thought, did you hear your own question? I mean, there's a reason he has 100 employees. He has 100 employees worth of work. You can't make 50
Right.
employees do 100 employees amount of work. And it really struck me that many of the legislators do not have the experience in business. They've never been the person to sign a paycheck for somebody.
Right.
And I think
Exactly.
one of the things the Job Creators Network really cares about, clearly you've had a lot of experience with this, Misty, is part of our job, part of our mission in Washington or in these states is to let legislators know what it's like to be a small business owner, what it's like to sign that paycheck, and
Yep.
what kinds of sacrifices you make and decisions you make. That these are not you're not being cruel, you're not trying
Right.
to deny people, but there are economic realities that you have to deal with. And I think many of the legislators just come out of a world where they just don't have that experience. And so it's
Right.
part of our job, both as advocates and then the job of small business owners, to let these legislators know, give them some insight into that world.
Exactly. I mean, education is probably the most difficult yet impactful part of advocacy here when you're talking about the franchisee community. I remember when Obamacare came out, and we were on the Hill constantly, and we were in somebody in the Senate side's office in the help committee, the committee of jurisdiction, and talking about the financial impact. And they said, "Well, yeah, but your franchisor pays for it, so what do you care?" Okay, well, no, that's not how that
Yeah.
works. And the franchisees kind of started laughing, not trying to be insulting, but the fact that the lack of understanding, and if you go down the line, and that's what really hit me. Here is my top line. Here's my bottom line. This is what happens. They sometimes it helps. Sometimes, unfortunately, they don't want to hear that. They just want to go with the soundbite, and unfortunately, that is the reality in many situations. But sometimes you do get through to them.
Well, it's interesting. One thing, there's a self-selecting group. The people who are advocating for small businesses or who are brought in front of Congress are the people who have been successful enough that their business is still in business. I almost wish there was an association for business owners who have failed, or franchisees who went out of business, because they could really tell the story that says, hey, these policies that you put in place, it didn't work. I couldn't make it work. And so you don't hear often from the failures. Even the business owners who come up and say, hey, if you make this law happen, here's how it's going to affect me, here's how it's going to hurt me, are not even as effective as the people who say who have already failed at business because of some of these policies.
Yeah, good point. And unfortunately, I think in California, for example, you're going to have a lot of those examples coming up in the next year.
Yeah, for sure.
Yep.
Well, Misty, I want to thank you so much for joining us, taking the time to join us on Main Street Matters, America's Small Business Megaphone. Can you share that website again for your organization?
Absolutely. Thank you. It's www.criticallaborcoalition.org. Please take a look and feel free to reach out. My contact information is on there, and we'd love to have you take a look and help with the labor shortage.
And thank you to all of you for taking the time to listen. Main Street Matters is part of the Salem Podcast Network. New episodes debut every Wednesday and Friday. Please subscribe at salempodcastnetwork.com or wherever you get your podcast from. And we'll be back soon with another episode.